Download Grammarly.
Are you me?
Yeah, you in 3 months. See, I love our ideas here, but this sentence structure could use a little work. Grammarly helps you clean up messy, confusing sentences to get your point across clearly.
Whoa.
Testing, testing,
Good luck.
testing, testing, testing. Oh, you know if I get the sound. 1, 2. Chat and go well and tell me if I get it, please. Testing 1, 2, clarity sound. 1, 2, 1, 2, testing, testing 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, clarity sound. 1, 2, testing, testing. Are you getting anything? 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing for clarity sound. All the testing, I'm just testing, testing. Is everybody there? Okay. I get nothing. Alright, I'm gonna check. Microphone 8, aux 1 up. Try again. Session again nothing. Testing, testing, testing. 8. Yeah, aux. Somebody turn on a solo for me. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, testing. Oh, the testing 1, 2. Wait. Oh, you send it back to me? A while ago when you do that, I'm not supposed to hear it. That means I have a loop and an effect.
A pleasant good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Howard Reed, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Please stand for the national anthem.
How a tech-tough and non-writer like myself can make a surge.
This public lecture, focusing on crime and security in Jamaica, is being hosted by the Department of Government in partnership with the Center for Leadership and Governance, USAID, and LAPOP Lab. To get things started, I move to invite the head of the Department of Government, Professor Suzette Horton, who is joining us remotely to give us the opening remarks.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm particularly excited to warmly welcome all of you to today's forum entitled Public Attitudes About Crime and Security in Jamaica, Findings from the America's Barometer Survey. Over the past 4 years, the Department of Government, through its Center for Leadership and Governance, has forged research relationships and participated in public forums. Today, its partnerships with USAID, LAPOP, Vanderbilt University have culminated in this forum. USAID, LAPOP, and Vanderbilt University have been instrumental partners in making this forum possible. Special welcome to Ms. Special welcome also to Major General Anthony Anderson, Commissioner of Police, Jamaica Constabulary Force, Ms. Diane McIntosh, Executive Director, Citizen Security Secretariat, Mr. Safre Brown, Director, Project Star Jamaica, and to Professor Anthony Harriott, Center for Leadership and Governance, Mr. Balford Lewis, Associate Professor, Faculty of Liberal Studies, University of Technology, Jamaica, Professor Lloyd Waller, and Mr. Howard Reed from the Department of Government, the University of the West Indies, Mono. And a very special welcome to the audience for gracing us with your presence. The Department of Government is recognized as a world-leading teaching and research department. It engages with global, regional, and national partners to resolve pressing challenges, including crime and security issues. The Department of Government and the Center for Leadership and Governance is working to make our world, our region, and our country a better place. As we all know, research and discourse on crime and security remains an imperative for all peoples and for all nations, but especially for Jamaican citizens and for Jamaica. This forum promises to inform debate and action using evidence-based data on these pressing issues. May I express thanks to our partners for the instrumental support, and we look forward to greater partnerships in the future. Welcome again, and I wish you all an academically stimulating forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Horton. We now move to take greetings from Alex Gaynor, Acting Country Representative, USAID, Jamaica.
Thank you very much. Greetings, thank you very much. Major General Anderson, Commissioner of Police, Professor Halton, Professor Lloyd Waller, the Center of Leadership and Governance at UWI-MONA, Mr. Luke Politowski from Vanderbilt University, distinguished panelists, distinguished guests, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, and through that, the U.S. government, to open today's panel discussion and presentation on the findings of the Latin American Public Opinion Survey, also known as LAPOP. Funded principally by USAID and implemented by LAPOP Lab at Vanderbilt University, these surveys are undertaken with the aim of providing constructive insights into the experiences and observations of the people of Jamaica on key things such as social, economic, and political issues. We had a very good panel discussion opening it up and talking about some of the highlights of the survey back in June, and we looked at things such as attitudes on democracy, crime and corruption, and also gender-based violence. And I'm very pleased that we're able to get back together today to look at the top-line results and have a more in-depth discussion on crime and security, and to have this group of expert panelists joining us to lead that discussion and inquiry. USAID, is also very happy to make the full LAPOP report open to everyone present today and also to the public, and we'll have more information on how to access copies of it. I want to note that the value of LAPOP to USAID as well. We look at it as an invaluable resource, and it isn't just a survey that we do and read the data and go, oh, that's nice. We use it to inform our activities, the implementation of those activities, and in our discussions and deliberations with stakeholders throughout Jamaica. We know it is of great value and great value to all to be able to know the opinions, the public opinions of the Jamaican people on these crucial issues. And it helps us identify problems, gaps, and opportunities that we then try to position our programming to address. So this is a very valuable tool, and I'm very grateful that we could get together today to discuss it and its findings. And I know that's why most people are here. Is to have that discussion, to review those findings. So let me not stand in the way anymore of that, getting to that debate and that discussion, but wrap up by saying thank you very much again to the University of the West Indies, MONA, for putting this together, our partnership with Vanderbilt University and the LAPOP Lab, and for our panelists today. And with that, let me hand it back over to the moderator. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gaynor. Interestingly, LAPOP is conducted out of Vanderbilt University and is the leader in public opinion surveys and research in Latin America. Our presenter for today, Dr. Luke Politowski, is a senior statistician and research lead at LAPOP, where he coordinates nationwide surveys across several countries. He joins us today to present his findings on public attitudes about crime and security in Jamaica. And as you are aware, given the challenges facing Jamaica as it relates to crime, this is a very timely and interesting presentation, given the importance of public opinion and public attitude towards influencing our assumptions and the questions we ask, and importantly, the support that we give to or the support that we withhold from the government's efforts in tackling crime. But before we invite Dr. Luke Politowski, let me take a few moments to introduce our panelists for today who are tasked with dissecting these important findings. First up, we have the man who holds what may quite possibly one of the most stressful jobs in Jamaica at this moment, Major General Anthony Anderson. Next, we have Mr. Balford Lewis, an associate professor serving in the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies at the University of Technology. Next, we have our very own Professor Anthony Ariat, Chair of the Center for Leadership and Governance here at the UWI. Joining us via Zoom, we have Ms. Safri Brown, who serves as Director of the recently launched Project STAR Jamaica. And then we have Ms. Diane McIntosh, Executive Director of the Citizen Security Secretariat. Welcome to you all, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. I can confidently say that I speak for all of us when I say we look forward to hearing your discussion on the presentation. Now, moving right along to our presenter, please join me in welcoming Dr. Luke Platowski.
I do have a flash drive. Will they be able to see it on the Zoom call? Yeah, can they see it on the Zoom, in the virtual?
Can they see it via Zoom?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. So I'll go ahead and introduce LabHub and myself. Let me get this here. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, panelists and guests, for joining. My name is Luke Platowski. I'm a statistician at LabHub Lab, and I'm the data collection coordinator for several of our studies in Latin America and the Caribbean, including our Jamaica study. And I also authored the 3 Jamaica-specific chapters in the country report that you have in front of you today. And in this presentation, I'm going to give a broad overview of sort of what we do at LabHub and the structure of our surveys, and then cover the main results of our most recent study in Jamaica. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, LabHub is a world leader in public opinion surveys focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. We were previously known as Latin American Public Opinion Project, but to emphasize our focus on the Caribbean and North America as well as Latin America, we shortened to just LAPOP. We're housed at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee in the US, and we take pride in our exceptional quality control practices when it comes to studies of public opinion in all the countries we survey. We manage all aspects of the survey lifecycle, including questionnaire and sample design, pre-testing, training of interviewers, fieldwork oversight, data processing, data analysis, as well as reporting. We receive generous support from USAID, which is where our principal funding comes from, and we work with a large network of academic institutions like the Department of Government here at UWI, NGOs, and local partners in order to make these surveys happen. LAPOP has been working in Jamaica going back to 2006, conducting a total of 8 nationwide surveys as part of our America's Barometer project. What is the America's Barometer? Well, it's our flagship study. It's a region-wide comparative study of public opinion. Each individual country survey is nationally representative, and we work with local survey firms to collect data in each country. Data collection takes place in rounds that are more or less every 2 years. And between 2004 and 2021, we've conducted a total of 370,000 interviews across 34 countries. 2023 is going to mark our 10th round of data collection and 9th in Jamaica. Previously, these interviews were done entirely face-to-face, which we plan to return to in 2023, but with the COVID pandemic, we made the decision to switch to exclusively telephone interviewing in 2021. The overall topic of the survey is about democratic attitudes and support for democracy, but we feature subtopics including the economy, rule of law, attitudes about institutions, questions about people's values, perceptions of corruption, and most relevant for today's discussion, experiences with crime and insecurity. We have some questions that are in our core questionnaire, which are common across all countries and all years, but we also have questions that are specific to specific time periods or countries. And all of our data and reports are freely available on our website, vanderbilt.edu/lapop. Or if you can't remember that, we also own americasbarometer.org, lapopsurveys.com, and one more that I'm forgetting now. So the 2021 round, which I'll be talking about today, it featured 22 countries, and it was our biggest survey yet. We usually do 1,500 interviews in each country in a year, but with the switch to telephone interviewing, we thought it was necessary to double our sample size to 3,000 in every country. All the training and pre-testing took place virtually because of the pandemic, which is actually an innovation that we plan to continue even as we go back to face-to-face interviews in 2023. So as I stated earlier, all of our materials are available on our website. You can find a digital version of the report for those of you who are joining us remotely at this URL, vanderbi.lt/jam21. You can also find all of our Jamaica-related materials, including questionnaires, reports, technical reports, and our data at this landing page, vanderbilt.edu/lapop/Jamaica. So to give you an idea of how our report is structured, which is kind of the focus of our event today, we begin with an introduction by Dr. Balfour Lewis, which provides some motivation for the study, as well as giving a broad overview of the results and their implications for Jamaican society. We then have 3 comparative chapters, which are sort of standardized across all our country reports. These focus on cross-national comparisons of some of our core items on 3 focus areas: support for democracy, attitudes about elections, and rule of law. And then the final 3 chapters are Jamaica-specific and focus on issues that are particularly important or relevant for this country. In this case, we have chapters on crime, gender-based violence, and the relationship between citizens and the police. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our survey methodology and then go into the findings from those 3 Jamaica-specific chapters on citizen security, citizen-police relations, and gender-based violence. Starting off with our survey methodology, I just wanted to give you some details about the study. There were, as I said, around 3,000 interviews with Jamaican people all over the phone this year for the first time in the history of the Americas Barometer. Fieldwork took place between May and July of 2021, and all interviews took place in English. We worked with the call center Worldwide BPO to collect the interviews using Jamaican interviewers. In terms of the sample design, it's nationally representative of the Jamaican public, or more precisely, Jamaican adults who own cell phones, since we can't interview people without cell phones, unfortunately. We randomly called select phones from a set of 50,000 pre-validated cell phone numbers, and to correct for any imbalances between the makeup of the sample and the population as a whole, we added survey weights based off the age, gender, education, and region of residence of the respondents, and this sort of ensures that the conclusions we draw from the data are reflective of the adult population of Jamaica as a whole. So speaking on citizen security, which is obviously the focus of our event today, I want to start off by giving you some high-level findings, though it's difficult to summarize the main takeaway from our survey here. And why is that? Well, what we found in 2021 are some seemingly contradictory results. We find that self-reported crime victimization and feelings of insecurity fell in 2021 compared to our last round, and they were actually the lowest out of all countries surveyed in Latin America and the Caribbean. But at the same time, there seems to be a lot of worry about crime. People cited it as their top issue facing the country more than any other country we studied, and a non-trivial amount of people are concerned about security and gangs in their neighborhoods. So now showing you the main results. The first question of our survey asked respondents what they believe to be the most serious issue facing Jamaica. And this is an open-ended question, but we recode their answers into 5 categories: security, economy, basic services, politics, or other, which this year included COVID-19 related issues. And we see that even with the pandemic taking root in Jamaica at this time, half the people we surveyed indicated that security was the top issue facing Jamaica, which could include answers like crime, gangs, kidnappings, murder, and other related issues. And the advantage of our comparative survey is that we can put these results in the context of other similar countries. So we see here how Jamaica stacks up in terms of the percentage of people saying security is the most important issue facing the country. And Jamaica is at the top in this measure. Next is Haiti, whereas most countries are below 10% saying crime is the top issue, as low as 1% in Brazil and Bolivia. On the other hand, we see what may be considered positive news or reassuring news when it comes to crime. We asked respondents whether or not they were a victim of a crime of any type in the past 12 months. And we see here that self-reports of crime victimization fell to just 7% in 2021, compared to a series high of 12% in 2019. And if we look at that in a cross-national perspective, we see Jamaica is on the low end in terms of people who report crime victimization. In some countries, such as Nicaragua and Mexico, a third of people reported being a victim of any type of crime. And we also wanted to assess perceptions of insecurity, not just actual victimization. So we asked respondents, thinking about the possibility of being assaulted or robbed, do you feel very safe, somewhat unsafe, or very unsafe? And the figure here shows the percentage that feel very unsafe or somewhat unsafe. So lower numbers are better. And similar to the last results, we can observe a drop in feelings of insecurity in 2021 compared to 2019 and 2017 especially. And again, looking in a cross-national perspective, this now shows feelings of security. So 82% of Jamaicans say they feel safe in their neighborhood, which is 10 percentage points ahead of the next highest country, Guyana, at 72%. We also asked one question about gangs this year. So the question is, to what extent respondents think their neighborhood is affected by gangs? A lot, somewhat, a little, or none. And this shows the percentage saying a lot or somewhat. Once again, we see, good news here. 23% said that gangs were present in their neighborhood, which is a 5 percentage point drop since 2017. Although I think we can agree that 25% of people seeing gangs in their neighborhood is, there's room for improvement there. So I'll leave this to the discussants to kind of interpret what these results mean. But from my perspective, I just wanted to offer some speculations about why it might be the case that people are very concerned about crime in general, but crime victimization and insecurity seems to be improving. I think there could be 3 possibilities. So there's question effects. We mentioned specific types of crimes in our questions, including robbery, assault, extortion, and violent threats. And maybe these aren't the type of crimes that people are worried about necessarily. So Jamaica's rate of murder is particularly high in comparison to other countries in the world, but we don't necessarily ask about murder since it's not possible to, interview people who were killed. So people may be concerned about organized crime as well, and not necessarily specific instances of individual crime, even if they're not, personally victimized. It was also just a weird year with COVID. People may have experienced a temporary drop in feelings of insecurity as they, were more sheltered indoors, but they don't expect that to last necessarily going into the future. And there could be something going on with the media. So people may hear about extreme cases of violent crime in other parts of the country or about organized crime, but they're not observing that or experiencing that themselves in their neighborhood. So I'll leave that discussion a little bit more for our panelists. Another primary area of focus for our study this year was gender-based violence, which is an all too common problem around the world, and in Jamaica in particular. Estimates suggest that 1 in 4 Jamaican women will be assaulted by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and the pandemic only made this problem more acute. So what we find with our results is that Jamaicans, when asked, directly overwhelmingly reject intimate partner violence. They say it's wrong, although many believe it's an issue that should be handled privately rather than in the courts or in hospitals. So we also find mixed belief about the judicial system's ability to punish perpetrators of domestic violence. And additionally, across several of our items, we can observe differences in attitudes about crime and gender-based violence by the respondent's gender. And I'll show you what I mean right now. So looking at the questions I showed you earlier, crime victimization and feelings of insecurity in the neighborhood, we see that although they're not necessarily victimized at a higher rate, women feel less secure in their neighborhood or more prone to robbery and assault. And that may be because women face threats of certain types of crimes that are not especially common among men, like intimate partner violence. And we observe this gender gap across time and across countries, which is sort of the motivation for our questions about gender-based violence. So let's delve deeper into that now. To learn more about this issue, we asked 2 key questions, whether respondents agree with 2 statements about gender-based violence. One is, a man has a right to discipline his partner using physical violence. Do you strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, or disagree strongly? And we see here reassuringly that most people disagree with that statement. Only 3% express some form of agreement. But we also wanted to ask about this issue kind of in a more subtle way. So we asked, physical violence between members of a couple is a private matter and should be handled by the couple or close family. And here we see more mixed attitudes on the bottom of this graph. Most disagree with that statement, but 44% do say that domestic violence should remain within the family, and it's not a matter of for the police or hospitals. And again, we observe a gender gap with these questions. We see that men are more likely to agree with the statement that domestic violence is a private matter. And we also observe marked effects by socioeconomic status. So we see that people with post-secondary degrees and people at the highest levels of wealth are less likely to agree that domestic violence is a private matter. Next, we asked 2 additional questions about how cases of domestic violence are handled by the criminal justice system. So this graph shows the results of a question. Suppose a woman in your community was beaten by her partner. If the incident was reported, how likely would it be for the police to take it seriously? Here we see that most people think it's at least somewhat likely or very likely to be taken seriously by the police. Nevertheless, there's some skepticism and 10% of people saying it's not at all likely. We observe very similar results for a question about how the judicial system, or how likely the judicial system would be to punish the culprit if the case were brought to justice. Again, around 40% say it's very likely, which is perhaps reassuring, but 10% still say, or 9% say it's not at all likely. And we observe slight gender differences here again. Men are 5% more likely to think that domestic violence will be taken seriously by police, although around 70% of both men and women think that courts will punish perpetrators of domestic violence. So all in all, we see kind of positive results, mostly regarding gender-based violence attitudes, but I think the results show there's still maybe some room for improvement, especially when it comes to the gender gap in attitudes between men and women. Now, in our final module, we tackle the issue of the relationship between the police and the citizens they serve, which is, I think, fundamental to understanding the issue of crime and its implications for society as a whole. Community-based policing, I believe, is a focus of USAID and the JCF. So we wanted to ask a little bit more about people's attitudes about the police. So we find that Jamaicans are and have been kind of distrustful of the police, although many have favorable views of the Jamaican Defense Force. We ask questions about closer working relationships between police and citizens, and most think that would help reduce crime. And most also indicated that they would be willing to participate in programs to fight crime alongside police. We also finally included a set of questions about treatment of criminals to sort of not just ask about police, but the accused. And the results show that Jamaicans have a perhaps complex and multidimensional view of how criminals should be treated. So one of our core items is about trust in the police. We see here that around 1 in 3 say they are trusting of the police. This is sort of in line with trust levels we observe for other institutions like the president, Congress, the media, and institutions like that. So there was a slight rebound in attitudes or trust towards the police in 2021, but it's still well below the series high of 41% that we saw in 2012. And if we look at that measure in a cross-national perspective, we see that Jamaica is around the middle in terms of the countries that we asked this question. It wasn't asked of all, but we see Jamaica is somewhere similar to Peru and Colombia, and Canada and El Salvador trust is much higher because of specific factors in those countries, and in Mexico and Dominican Republic trust is much lower. And I wanted to show you kind of a breakdown of those results by common demographic factors. So those who trust the police tend to be more often female. Trust is a little bit higher among females than it is for men. Older people tend to be a little bit more trusting of police. The 50-plus age category had about 13 percentage points more trust than 18 to 29-year-olds. And again, we observe a socioeconomic status effect. People with higher levels of education and wealth are less trusting of police. And we wanted to ask the question in a slightly different way to assess, question wording effects, perhaps. So this has to what extent the respondent trusts police in their neighborhoods, so not the national JCF, but people, police officers in their neighborhood. And we see kind of mixed results on this question. The most common response was they don't trust the police at all, but then the next most common response was at the other extreme, trust a lot. And if we consider an answer of 5, 6, or 7 on this 7-point scale to be trusting, we see that 43% trust local police compared to 33% trusting national police. So there may be some factors in terms of familiarity with people and working with specific police officers compared to the institution as a whole. We also ask every year about support for the military. So in terms of Jamaica, it's the JDF. And we see sort of the mirror image of what I showed you related to the police. Most people are very trusting of the military, and it is actually the highest out of all institutions that we ask about. 3 in 5 say they trust the military, which is pretty consistent over time. As I mentioned, we ask questions more specifically about community-based policing or relationships between police and the communities they serve. So we ask, let me see the wording for this. Do you think that a working relationship between the police and citizens would help reduce crime? And people are very receptive to that. 55%, a majority, say that it would help reduce crime a lot. So there seems to be an appetite for more or better relationships between police and citizens. And that's been kind of consistent over time. We see, near a majority or a majority say that would help reduce crime a lot. And then we ask, how willing would you be personally to work on such programs to help fight crime alongside police? And most people are, again, receptive to that. 62% say willing or very willing. And interestingly, the willing answer is more common than the very willing. So could be that people have questions about the details of such programs or how that program would work before they fully commit, but people are open to working with police. And again, we see that across time, people show willingness to work with police. 62% in 2021 compared to a low of 55%, but still very high in 2010. And again, I saw some interesting breakdowns by the demographic factors in terms of the people willing to work with police. So we see that men actually say they're more willing to work with police compared to women, which is interesting because in the last graph, we saw that women are more trusting of police. Again, we see an age effect, so older people are significantly more likely to want to work with police. We see that people with lower educational attainment are more willing to work with police compared to people with secondary degrees. And there's a regional effect as well. So people from the Surrey region are much more willing to work with police compared to people from the Kingston area. Finally, we have 2 items about attitudes towards criminals and what people think should happen with criminals. So we ask if people agree with the statement that punishment of criminals should increase in order to reduce crime. And people overwhelmingly agree with that statement. 2/3 give the most extreme response of strongly agree, and only about 10% express some disagreement that punishment of criminals should increase. Then we ask, sort of from a different perspective, employers discriminate against people with past criminal behavior. So assessing attitudes about criminals who are re-entering society to sort of get at the support for rehabilitation programs and things like that. And we see really mixed attitudes here. So most people agree with the statement, but around 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 say they disagree that employers discriminate against people with criminal backgrounds. So I think that kind of shows there's perhaps a complicated or multi-dimensional view of crime. People maybe think that criminals should be punished strongly, but once they're out of out of prison, that they should be allowed to re-enter society. And I wanted to close by talking about our next round of data collection. So we're planning another round for Jamaica in 2023, our 9th round, as I mentioned earlier. We're returning to face-to-face data collection with the help of the Center for Leadership and Governance. We're planning fieldwork for May, and we expect the results to be released by the end of 2023, since we need kind of the results for all countries to come in, and Jamaica is near the beginning of data collection. And the questionnaire is still under development, but we expect that crime and gender-based violence will be focuses again, so we hope to kind of continue assessing these measures that we've been looking at across time and see, what was really going on in 2021 and how have things changed since then. So with that, I'll conclude and turn it over to our panelists. Thank you.
Interesting findings. Thank you, Dr. Luke Plotowski, for your presentation. I will now move right along into our discussion segment with our panelists, after which we will take questions from the audience here and online. I'd like to first invite Police Commissioner Anthony Anderson to give his view on the findings. We'd like to also thank the Commissioner for taking the time out of his busy schedule to join us here today, and note that he'll have to leave right after his presentation. Commissioner?
Right, thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. Of course, when you actually have okay. Oh, you want me to come to the? All right, sure. That's fine. So again, good morning to everyone. Thanks for inviting me here to be a part of this, and also for the team from LAPOP that has produced this type of work. It's always best when you're designing or structuring your way forward, and as you develop your organization, especially an organization that's as integrated and pervasive as the JCF is, that you're doing it based on some form of data, and basing your activities on some sort of science that can that now allows you to have some measurable outcomes, sometimes your own, but also those outcomes that are recorded over time, to see where you're going as an organization. So I take the results of the survey as good. I mean, it's not one of those things you can cherry pick from to see what you like and what you don't like. What it is what it is, and that forms the basis of what you do going forward. Now, clearly it started with the whole business of victimization and perception. I think that was the first point you had made. And, having looked at it previously, it raised as many questions as I'm sure it raised for you, because you're, in one sense, of the 20 or so countries surveyed, your victimization rate is the lowest. Most people will anecdotally say, that can't be, but it is what it is. The victimization, the lowest of the 20 countries. And then in terms of how people feel in their own space, in their own neighborhood, at 82% feeling that they are safe is interesting, because anecdotally you would say, no, that can't be the case. But that's what the survey actually says. So you have two figures here, but at the same time, the greatest concern is about crime and security matters, which is at the top. Now, I'm sure there are many discussions that can be had around why this is so, why you have that, what I call an extreme contrast, not just a contrast, because in one sense you're at one end, absolutely at the end, and in the other sense, you're extremely at the other end to a point where the next person up is a large percentage higher. I think in terms of victimization, we're at 7%. The next highest is 11% or something like that. So that's a massive increase. So the question is, what's causing that? The other part of it is how people feel about us as a police force locally, with the people you interface with, and how you feel about the force generally in the country. And the significant spread between those two points. Now, this is not unique to this survey. It's happened before. We're seeing that spread. And perhaps there may be some questions about perception at a distance, which is informed largely by the information that is sent to your phone that you take in from various places, the discussions, and so on, and what you experience yourself. That's what you're really, it seems like that is what you're seeing. And perhaps one of the reasons why we're seeing that is that things that the police used to see exclusively now come to your phone instantly. So the sort of, you used to hear about crimes, particularly highly violent crimes. You'd hear about them, you'd read about them in the newspaper. You may see a clip on the news, but for some time they have really banned graphic images from most newscasts. That shifted to almost instantaneously as the thing occurs, it's coming to your phone in really graphic details, with somebody taking their, one of our citizen journalists taking images from the scene and beaming that all over the country, and then you get that on your phone. So it now puts you in that position where you join with us to see the sort of the underbelly of the society and get bombarded in a way that heretofore was impossible and not available. I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out as a possibility, or at least one of the influencing factors on that. Once there is a perceptual gap, one of the ways that we see to use, or one of the methodologies to bridge that gap and to cross over, of course, is how we communicate, how we expose the persons we serve to what we do, and how we communicate in the language and in the way in which people receive information now, as opposed to hoping that people will pay attention to what we say in more traditional ways. And so we've done a fair amount of work on that communications bit in the organization, particularly out on social media and so on. And it has, you can actually, very measurable, you can see your level of engagement and your reach, and it is growing. But that's one of those big questions. I am actually happy that it is that way, that the reality, the perception is higher than the reality that people are experiencing, as opposed to the other way around. That's a good thing. But of course, the why is the matter that we'll have to deal with, and also how we get it even better. I mean, that's critical. On the matter of gender-based violence, now we see a situation in Jamaica, particularly, obviously the big one for us is murders and shootings, which can end up in murders. That's the big thing for us, not just us as a force, but us as a country, and to a great extent, sometimes we deny other types of policing services in the pursuit of reduction of homicides. And just that's an imperative, because that's the only thing that you can't recover from. Now, it doesn't mean, what it means is that even as we do that, we have to build capacity as an organization to do both, because there's really no room to do one. What impacts most people is not murder. It is public order issues, minor crime issues, what you call, of course, all minor crime is not minor to the person who's experiencing it, and that sort of thing. So it's incumbent on us to make sure that we can do all. And so we have gone through major changes as an organization in terms of how we bring in people into the organization, the type of training they get, the quality standards that we set, and how we manage our business. And it's important that we do this more and more, is to subject ourselves to standards and scrutiny, and take the worst feedback and start work on that to try and get better. There's no point hiding from it, but doing it. And for that reason, we launched a number of things. One example of that is when we subjected ourselves to auditing to achieve an ISO 9001 certification. And so I think we're one of about maybe 4 law enforcement agencies in the hemisphere that actually have ISO 9001 certification in some of our areas. And we have an ongoing process as we expand that. Now, what that does really, more than anything else, is it really subjects you to rigorous external audit, not just of not just of your finances, but of all your processes and your documentation of your processes, and how you manage risk, how you deal with the risk, and how you plan. So all of your plans have to be audited throughout, all the way down, to allow that to get that certification and retain it, of course. And so it ensures and demands that we do certain things. It's not always nice. It's very difficult to keep it up. But what happens is that you end up getting this internal audit capacity as well, that the auditors are really persons who are in your organization. Now, when you look at things from the position of an auditor, and then you go back to where you are in charge of or what you do, you start to fix where you are. So we see it spreading out to other places and impacting the force in that way. So in terms of gender-based violence, this is a big thing for us. It's something that we capture data at a single point. It's sent in from all over the country, and it has driven us to build out. We have now 10 domestic violence centers. As a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody else has any, but we have the domestic violence centers. The police run them. We have specially trained police managers for these centers. We bring in qualified mental health and qualified persons in the field to deal with it, who are counselors of various sorts, psychologists, and so on. Now, they are, apart from what they bring to the table and their qualifications and certifications, we also have a program that we run everybody through who is going to deliver through our centers. What that means is that we can have a certain consistency in what we do. And so we have thousands of cases coming into those 10 centers, not just women, but men also, who are the subject of domestic violence. And also we get in a smaller group, but we get in persons who are actually doing it. Because in between episodes of them doing it, quite often they want to not do it. And so they seek help in that way. Now, that doesn't take away anything from the actual criminal case if there's actually been violence and somebody comes and reports to us as damaged. But you find in a lot of those cases, people do not pursue it beyond the initial report. And therefore, we can't go anywhere with it. So one of the ways we deal with that is if they're unwilling to pursue it through the court system, then we divert it to one of our centers, which gives us another bite of the cherry. Because what we see at the end result, if that is not dealt with, quite often you end up with a homicide. And so that's what we're trying to prevent, and preventing more assaults and offenses against the person. In terms of the citizens-police relations, the trust, community policing, so this is a discussion that is held, and there are not much fora for discussions. There are lots of things that are thrown out there, terms and things that people, we have a combative sort of relationship of how we should deal with crime, and different groups holding very strong positions and combating each other. Of course, once you have that, the criminals move right between those differences. That's their space to operate. So what we have is an integrated policing model. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. It means as a national police force, there's no type of policing that is done that we don't do. We have to do it all because there's nobody else to do it. And so naturally, sometimes we compare the Jamaica Constabulary Force with a city police force, or a regional police force that has many other entities doing law enforcement in the same space, and the collaboration between all of those gets the result. In Jamaica, it's a JCF pretty much. And so we have multiple cultures coexisting in a single organization. Now, and it's once you understand it, it becomes quite easy. I mean, it's obvious that my persons who do communications have a different culture than my persons who do intelligence. One wants to talk about everything and one wants to talk about nothing. We find that persons who are on my SWAT team do not have the same culture as the persons who do community safety and security. They're different. They come from different cultures, and those cultures are defined by the work they do. Now, with these, because you have different cultures, don't mean you have a clash of cultures. All of the cultures can coexist because you ground them on particular values. And you ground them on that the organization is a force for good. You ground them on rule of law, and you ground them on respect. Now, each one of those cultures can exist in that realm and on that basis. So you have to have something that ties these cultures together. But it's a multicultural organization, and you have to integrate those cultures and how they manifest into what is your policing model. Now, in terms of trust building, every divisional plan that is come up with has they basically use a planning model that is called, that we term IIOII. So information, investigations, operations, interventions, and information. Those are the 5 things. These plans are done annually by every division in the country, and they are reviewed. We're actually going through the review period now. They're reviewed with a team that is largely led by a Deputy Commissioner of Police and experts from each of those fields of IIOII. That I means that every division has to document their engagements that they're going to have with the community and the communities that they serve over the year. And those are assessed and measured, and we're looking for measurable outcomes from these interventions. COVID provided its own opportunities for us to do that even more, and that is to support persons who are shut in, to deal with the matter of children being out of school. It caused a cross-fertilization of cultures. So, and an example is in St. James. In St. James, our quick response team, those are the guys who really move around on motorcycles in teams to engage persons who are doing armed robberies, shootings, and that sort of thing, and they intercept them and or capture them. So that team ended up delivering homework to 250 students around the hills of Montego Bay, because they don't have internet up there, and they were out of school, so we were taking homework back and forth between the school and them. What that means is that you have a generation of youngsters coming up now who see the guys with a submachine gun in blue uniforms and so on as the person who brings homework, the person who assists them. And so that was, and even in the process of dealing with some of the shut-ins and in communities where people didn't have things, I made it very clear, I want my door kickers, the people who are the hard end of policing, to go deliver those. And that starts to change the dynamic between them. Now, when you do this, the results don't happen instantly, but the more of it you do, and it becomes the norm, and all of a sudden attitudes start to change, because usually the more you know about people is you know how similar they are rather than how different they are. And so we leverage that. I know I'm going on for a bit, let me just finish off quickly. So this idea that people want to work with the police is something that we, of course, embrace. We have a significant number of programs where we actually do work with communities on things that the communities want. And this has allowed us over time to build the relationship with communities, because we do, a lot of the information we get is from the community. And we find that the better our community relations are, is the better the quality of the information is that we get. But they also expect that we become the answer to the fears that the community has. So you have persons in communities who create fear in the community even when they're not doing criminal activities. Just their presence creates significant fear in the community because of previous acts or the potential to do harm. And so in some communities, it's challenging for people to engage us properly whilst these you have dominant criminal gangs in the community. And so that informs a lot of our operational strategies. That's how we came out with a zone of special operations. That's why we do states of public emergency and that sort of thing. So there is an aspect of crime that is murder that operates a little different from other crimes. That comes from a different place, different motives, and generates itself in a different way. And so it's very important to understand that as you develop your overall crime strategy, that you don't use murder and crime interchangeably. It's because it has differences that are material in how your approach is to it. And so certainly from our perspective, the desire to work with the community and that community's desire is both ways. That's why we're a part of the STAR program jointly with the PSOJ and the Jamaica Constabulary Force to reach out into communities and get a lot of work done, including employment, which is, of course, interesting that the survey looked at attitudes towards ex-cons. The last thing I'll say is that the whole attitudes towards punishment of criminals, every survey I've seen has felt that in Jamaica we are soft on in our legislation on crime and criminals, but I think perhaps there's a more sophisticated view that we would take, because I agree that we are actually quite soft on it, but the answer is a little more complex to that than just changing one aspect of it, which is making laws stronger. We have issues like recidivism. What happens if we're putting persons away, what happens to them over that period? Because when they come out, obviously you don't want them to get back to their old ways, but to do different things. Obviously, with very short, there are studies that show with very short sentences below a certain amount, your chances of rehabilitation drop off significantly. So you need enough time to do that rehabilitation and the facilities to do it. And more importantly, the intention that's important. At the moment, we run recidivism of about 42%, which means that I am guaranteed every year, year on year, about 500 plus persons who are going to come out and commit a crime that is more violent than the one they did before. That is guaranteed. Before I start any crime data, any crime thing, I know that this is going to happen because it has happened consistently. So if I can't drop that number, then that's another problem. But that's probably part of a different discussion. So I think I'll stop there. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks.
All right, so thank you, Commissioner Anderson. A lot to unpack and consider as the JCF continues their transformation to meet the needs of Jamaicans. So as I mentioned earlier, the Commissioner, given his schedule, will have to leave a bit early. So we're asking for a quick pause to take a quick break for the organizers and panelists to have a quick session with the Commissioner before he goes. Stay close. Our next discussant will be Mr. Balford Lewis. We'll return in less than 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, sorry about that, everyone. So before we go on our quick break, do we have any questions for the Commissioner before he leaves? The Commissioner is taking questions from the audience here and from those online. Mario Galpert.
Good day, everyone. My name is Mario Galbert. I am a member of the Governance Society at UMONA. So my question is, as it relates to the data that we received so far, it shows that people are more trustworthy in local police based on the data that was provided. Now we have been using the Zozo for over time now, and I think that when we do have these Zozos in the communities, it's sometime for a long while. Do you think that, with the Zozos, people would be more trustful of the police, based on the data that is provided?
Okay. So I'm not sure that they look specifically at Zozo as opposed to non-Zozo. So the scheme of a zone of special operations was really to yeah, so I don't know that, it's working now. Okay, good. So the scheme of a zone of special operations is really to create, it's almost to bring a peacekeeping model to an area that has had a lot of violence over time. And it's on the increase. It is very resource intensive, how it is done, and it really pacifies the community, and we have seen that through the numbers in all of those, in all communities where we put it in place. It also requires, and it was unique in the legislation, that it requires that interventions be done in terms of support to the community. I don't know that there's another one. I mean, almost well, anecdotally, but also just best practice will tell you that even as you deal with the violence in a community, there has to be some community building activities that go along with it. What the ZOSO Act does is actually enshrine that in law. So it has to be done. So you have a committee and it must be done and so on. What that has meant is that within a zone you'd expect over time, just the interaction without violence should improve that. And that's perhaps a study that should or can be done. You know, when that legislation was written, and it is, I think it went through some, I know it was going through, I'm not sure if it has been, the amendments have been all passed yet, but the Zones Act was being shifted. Now, it hasn't passed as yet, but there are amendments being done to the Act. Because the security part of that was much better defined than the intervention aspect of it. Maybe because there's not a lot of legislation around intervention. It's just something you do administratively. So it designates committees and so on, but the actual programs are not as specific. And the challenge with those programs, so in a sense, on the security side, you're used to adapting and being very nuanced depending on the place that you're going into. It's less so on the intervention side. It tends to be prescriptive, and you have a list of things that you do. What you found over time is that that list doesn't apply equally to different spaces because of their own backgrounds, history, and so on. So you'll find that somewhere like Mount Salem in St. James has its own set of challenges, and those are not the same challenges as you'll find in Denhamtown in Kingston, totally different. There are some things that do it, so rather than have a general prescription, you have to have a much more specific prescription, and that coming up with that prescription is going to require collaboration and feedback with the community. Over time, we expect, as security persons, to build trust in those spaces. So let's see what the data says.
If I may add a comment here. My mic is on.
Oh, someone else is talking.
Yeah, if I may add a quick comment here. Maybe just an amplification of what the commissioner just said, but I hope a worthwhile one. My reading of the question was whether under conditions of regular, fairly intensive contact between citizens and their police force, do you have increased trust or not? Right? And I think that is important, because if you get increased trust under conditions of intense contact, then it opens up the possibilities that the report suggests. Citizens are willing to cooperate with the police to get better crime control performance outcomes. And the challenge, therefore, would be to build structures in communities where there's high trust to bring about that result. One last quick thing on this is that my understanding of the possible difference between this result, where you get much higher levels of trust in the communities, but you get distrust of what the report calls national police. It's not really national police, but I think you understand what it means. Remote police, police in which you have close contact. All right. So there are two types of contact with police: involuntary and voluntary. With your remote police, 95 or plus percentage of the contacts are going to be involuntary. Police stop you, suspect you of something, calling you to account. It's not a pleasant contact. Where there is presence in the community in an ongoing way, there's going to be a shift in the ratio between involuntary and voluntary, and that, I suspect, is going to be trust generating.
Thank you for your comments, Professor Harriet. We have an online question. Let me pull it up. For the Commissioner, how long do you believe we need to continue using the SOEs before we can move away from using them more routinely?
Well, I mean, yes, we haven't been using them routinely. We've tried to, but we actually haven't. I mean, the truth of the matter is around this issue, and unfortunately, the issue is there are two components to the issue. One is the technical component of it and why and how it works, and then there is obviously the political component of it, where you have rival positions politically. Now, over time, clearly this one has been divisive on the political side, and so one of the impacts of any emergency powers, or certainly in the scheme and design of it, is a psychological impact. And one part of that impact is that you're going to cohere as a group and society around this notion that too many of our persons, our citizens are dying. And that then becomes the touch point of which we shape all the things we do. Once you have division around that, then something else, whatever it is a higher priority than saving lives. That's reducing this number. Now, that is what has happened. And so even in so you have the operational execution of it, where you have a few additional powers. They're not that many, but they are significant. Like most things of this nature, the answers are actually not as complicated as one thinks. There are some very specific things that yield results. But one of the key components of once you're dealing with any form of conflict and violence, the psychology of the combatants matter. The impact it has on why people change their minds and behave in different ways is not just a function of some physical activities, but it's a function of who we as a society other. So is the other the person who's pulling the trigger and killing people out there? Or do we other agents of the state? Or do we other whoever it is? So this psychology of that matters in getting the effect. So we recently, as you know, did a few weeks ago, and we had a significant fall off briefly for the 2-week period. Now, the question is, we had 53 people in detention, 53. The number of persons I have in custody across the island is 1,800. 53 came in detention, and you get this huge drop. Now, clearly it cannot be because those 53 people were accounting for all of that. So there is in the terms of the technical use of it, there is a psychology that comes with it that causes bad actors, to behave differently. Now, if that was the conversation out there, then perhaps some understanding of why it's necessary or something similar is necessary in order to cause those numbers to come down, even as we as a force build our capacity upwards, our capacity to do. And those two will meet in the middle somewhere. And ideally, there's a point where you drive it down, where you hit the tipping point, where almost anything you do additionally will continue it going down. There is a reason. It's not the circumstance that we find ourselves in is not new. We crossed the 1,000 mark in 1997, which means that this thing is chronic in a way that is almost just part of life. And unfortunately, it's difficult to get people to have a gut or emotional response to something that has been in place for 25 years. That it's certainly not an emotional response that, or a visceral response that lasts for more than a minute. Because if 1,000 people die a year, well, they've always done since 1997. So, you know, let's put that aside and deal with other matters. So it's a complicated thing, and you know, I've thrown out something, but you know, there are not many fora where you can actually discuss this in a way that is not combative, but just seeking to understand and improve on it to make it, and along with all other things that we do. Because the other point is there's nothing that we stop doing when these are in place. Every single thing from the integrated policing model continues with community policing, intervention. Those divisional plans don't go on hold. They just allow them one extra thing, one or two extra things to do. And one of the extra things is they can cause the persons in a community who are identified by a community as creating fear in the community to not be there. Now the impact of, unless you've lived in fear, the impact of removing fear from you for a few days is not, it won't be fully appreciated. But that's what it does, and there's no other legislation that allows us to do that, including not a zone of special operations. They can be there, they just can't carry out their criminal activities. The challenge with fear is the person who is it doesn't need to have a gun. They just need to walk past and look at you. And that triggers fear. So, hope that was useful.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. We have one final question from the gentleman right here.
Good day, my name is Javon Aiken. I'm a UMONA student from the Department of Government. You made a reference earlier to there being, I think you said 42% chance of those recently incarcerated who are once free, they come about and do more harder crimes.
Yeah, recidivism.
Yeah, so I was wondering if, since you're aware of this, and you said all statistics, you have to take this in mind. So I was wondering, since you're aware of this, is there anything going on to amend it or to like deal with the issue?
Well, it's something that we are encouraging because it really doesn't fall under us.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the whole the correctional system does not fall under the police. So our job stops at the courts, and then it goes from the courts into the correctional system if convicted. So what we do is actually lobby, raise this as an issue and a concern for us, and just because you do two things. In one sense, you're the police, but this is Jamaica. We are Jamaicans, and so we're interested beyond what is ours, and that's why we have DV centers and so on. But
do you know as to why this happened?
Why what?
Why once they're free, they go on to do harder crimes?
I suspect because there have been studies that show that the sort of rehabilitation programs that are implemented can cause recidivism to drop quite significantly if they're done properly. We have not spent a lot on the prison system, and I suspect the reason why we haven't is because the view of the prison system is consistent with the same view that we must punish harder. It comes together. It's the same mentality that does both. However, unless you're going to put everybody in prison forever, you're creating your own problem. So it's really, it doesn't matter how you feel about it. There's an enlightened self-interest that comes from investing in the entire criminal justice system so that when they come out one end, you don't come back in the other end. That's the idea.
All right, thank you for your questions. So again, before the commissioner leaves, we're asking for a quick pause. And I would like to
there was one young lady here who had a hand up from the very beginning. I know, she's little.
Ready?
Right. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Moni Faris, the president of the Governance Society at UMONA. My question is, from the statistics that was shown by Dr. Luke, we realized that Jamaica has one of the highest rates in crime. Now that we are approaching a new year, what is the crime strategy for Jamaica?
Okay, what he showed is that we actually have one of the lowest actually, of the 20 countries, not the highest, the lowest.
The lowest?
Lowest crime. The lowest.
Oh,
and
my
the
my
security,
apologies.
the safety, the feeling of safety is the
Yes.
highest feeling of safety.
Oh, yes.
And the lowest feeling
yes,
of crime.
I'm so sorry. Thank you
Right,
for
right.
correcting me.
Yes.
But my question is still, what is the crime strategy for Jamaica for the upcoming year?
Oh, so it's not. You don't have. So the crime strategy won't change annually. What you have are a layered set of plans, and you. So there are a number of inputs to those plans. So we have, at the highest level, we have our corporate and strategic plan that is the big things that you're going to do that allows you to have a budget and shows how you're going to do that. Below that, you're divided into a number of portfolios: crime and security, force development and logistics, administration, operations, strategic operations, and our inspectorate. So those 5 portfolios, all of the policing departments come under it in some way. All of them have a portfolio plan which speaks to how they're going to do, how they're going to improve and deliver their service through that portfolio over the year. Okay. Below that level now is you have to start to get into the operational level. You normally are commanded by Assistant Commissioner of Police. So you'd have one, the country is divided into 5 police areas and 19 police divisions under those 5 areas. Those are the police that you'll see normally, who are the territorial police. At the other side, you have the counterterrorism and organized crime branch. You have this criminal investigation branch. You have narcotics and so on. And all of these, and it's layered like that. All of these departments have to create their plans for what they're going to deliver. Now, let me focus on the divisional plans. As I said, all divisional plans are submitted. They're going through the process now of review, and it goes through an iterative process until it's acceptable. So the divisional plans largely follow their intelligence plan, their investigative strategy and plan over the period, their operations or operational plan, their intervention plan, that's the whole community policing bit of it, that you think of it in that way, and then our information plan. How are you going to communicate externally and internally and with your local stakeholders, but how does your communication become part of the overall organization's communication bit? In terms of the operations now, there are a suite of tactics that you now use, and that is based on how we GIS map crime and events. So we have a GIS system. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, I sent up an officer to receive the Esri Prize, Esri, California, for the use of GIS in law enforcement in the world. So we were considered the people who use that the most. So I can go on pretty much and from my conference room, from my office, and look at where every crime of a certain nature, largely major crime, occurred, and at what time of day. So we track time of day, crime bands, who, demographics, a number of things. Now that informs how we plan, because we know at this time of day, largely between this time and this time, we have twice the opportunity or twice the chance of this type of crime occurring here. Now, having information is one thing, of course. How you respond to all of that data and information is another thing. So you have to break it down. You break it down to a station. So station plans become divisional plans, and so on. And that's how it's nested. The tactics and techniques will largely be the same. It's how you put those together to best effect and to get the best response, and where you take risk. When you don't have enough, you're going to say, okay, if I'm here, then I will have 10 crimes occur here, so let me go here, as opposed to here where 5 occur. That's a choice, because it's numbers as well. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't want to deal with these 5, because you know, but you just have to make choices. That's the chance. And so even in your design of how you build capacity, it's informed by what you need. So when you know what you need, when you have the data, then you can also look at how you need to deploy and your capacity. So we know how many, for instance, I know how many police officers we need. How do I know? Because we've developed an algorithm that can tell you that how many police officers you need in a police force. There are usually about 4 different measures that you use. Could be crime data, could be demographics, population, and so on. We created an algorithm where we used all 4 and a factor for increased population over time, over a day. So for instance, if you have a cruise ship coming in, you could have 2 cruise ships coming to Trelawney, they drop off 10,000 people. That changes the whole population of that. So there's a factor in the algorithm that takes care of that. That formed the basis on which we can get the Ministry of Finance to agree with us that we need this number of officers. We're not guessing, and we're not saying, well, over in California they needed 10 officers per 100 people. That would be useless for us. We have to look at what happens in Jamaica, create our own science, copyright our science, and have models that are uniquely Jamaican. There's no reason why we can't excel in this area in the way we excel in all other areas that we put our minds to. The problem is that sometimes the conversation, we don't get a chance to have these conversations, so people don't know. In the end of January, I'll be having an expo, a JCF expo at the National Stadium and National Arena. People will have an opportunity to interface in a very interactive way with their police force, your police force. Okay?
Thank you. All right, thank you for your question, President of the Governance Society. As mentioned earlier, the Commissioner has to leave, so we're going to take a quick shot, and I'm asking Deputy Directors of the CLG, Drs. Shanique Walters, Dr. Gavin Daly, and Project Manager Professor Lloyd Waller to come up to the front.
What? Sorry, what were you saying? Sorry, I missed that. Okay. Sorry. Grab everything.
All right, thank you for your patience, everyone. So we're going to resume the discussion with Mr. Balford Lewis joining us. Mr. Balford, sorry, joining us from University of Technology.
Thank you very much. Good morning again. I've been asked to cut my presentation by 2/3, but we'll see. Okay, my focus will be on community policing or citizens, police-citizen relations. Okay, we have had some discussion on that before. And what I'll be starting off with is one of the major findings in this regard. The suggestion that this is a very important aspect of the whole policing approach. What we found in the study that was discussed earlier, 8 out of 10 Jamaicans believe that the pathway to any sustained crime control, the pathway to citizen security, is definitely going to be better quality relationship between the police and citizens. And somebody said in a discussion recently that that's a socially desirable answer. Nobody going to say working with the police is not a good idea. But what we have seen that over the years, since the question was first asked in 2008, the percentage or the proportions in Jamaica that suggest that we need to improve working relationship with the police has always been in the 80. I remember one year it was 80-20, okay? So I decided not to focus on that particular question. I decided to focus on a more concrete item that asks specifically if projects were implemented, if programs were put in place to improve police-citizen relations and to reduce crime, what is the extent to which people would willingly participate? And when we asked that particular question, we found that 6 out of 10 Jamaicans indicate that at point that as long as projects are in place, they'd be willing to participate. Okay, so it's still hypothetical, but it's much more concrete. So what we found, though, is that although we have such strong popular support for working with the police and people's commitment to work on projects, we still have a situation where communities are not participating in any activities to any great extent, away from the police youth clubs. And we have seen a situation just recently, for example, where the police was trying to make an arrest and women were creating a barrier and pushing away the police, and eventually I saw one of the scene officer had to come and pull back his officers and walk away from the situation, and the guy who was supposed to be arrested move on, you know. So that is not a situation of people working with the police. So therefore, the question is, why can't we improve police-citizen relationship despite the fact that the security force has as one of their major components in the fight in crime is community policing? And I'm going back to the point that was made recently, is that it is all about the trust factor. The people are not trusting of the police. And we have 2 different types of trust. We have interpersonal trust, where people in the community trust each other, and in that regard also trust the police and are prepared to work with the police. But we also have the institutional trust, which is the level of the national police, where we see where the figure is that people are not trusting the police. Over the years, the police is in the same category as politicians in terms of level of trust. 30%. Only 30% of Jamaicans have indicated their trust in the police over the past many years, since 2006. The highest figure was in 2012, Dr. Putwelsi mentioned, where it was 41. But sometimes it is 20 little, sometimes it is 30 little. So the whole situation is that what we need to be focusing on, therefore, if we want better working relationship with the police, is to find ways of improving trust. And as we said, it is not necessarily through more contact, because one of the things we have seen is that the Army, the Jamaica Defense Force, had enjoyed high level of trust over the years. And there are now some concerns that the fact that the police are, the security, the army is on the streets so often, getting involved in hard policing, getting involved in this paramilitary police approach, it is that over time their trust level going to fall also. So the commissioner made the point recently that people interacting with the police more may improve that level of trust. But that is kind of contradictory if we're taking a look at the relationship with the army and the police right now. As Professor Harriet made the point recently, we have two types of interaction. We have the voluntary and the involuntary interaction. And if we can maybe promote that involuntary interaction where people go into the community and work beyond the police youth club approach. We have seen, for example, where the Grand Spend experiment worked for a good little while, but the problem is about sustainability. The Augusttown experiment, our experience, I'm not too sure if it falls in the same category, worked for about a year. And when people started to celebrate by the following January, we had a situation where we go back to the crime problem. So the situation here, therefore, or the challenge that we have is how do we improve community police relationship on a long-term basis, in a more sustainable manner, to make sure that we can use that approach to fight in the fight against crime. Just recently, I had a discussion with the communication officer, Mr. Dennis Brooks, and he pointed me to the Community Safety and Security branch of the force that he said is concerned not only with paramilitary policing planning, but mostly in terms of this kind of soft policing where they get involved in improving community relationship. And he talked about the proactive interruption strategy, which is really the conventional policing approach. But what he emphasized was what he called the proximity policing, where you bring the police closer to the community, bring the police closer to the people. But the challenge, as we said here, if we're going to use that argument, that close involvement of the police with the community sometimes leads to some form of take-for-granted approach, or people feel they can challenge the police, as in some of these cases on the street, then we're going to have a problem there in terms of how do we move forward with improving that quality of the relationship. Just see what I leave out here. Yes, the other point I want to make, just recently, the Prime Minister made the point that the government is now moving away from depending to this great extent upon eyewitness report, which is a problem there. What he indicated is that the focus these days is on the use of high-tech approaches, like cyber forensic processing and DNA, from crime scene and things like those. So I understood this to mean that there has been a kind of a recognition or an acknowledgement that the community policing approach has failed. Because if he's saying, and he said it specifically, he made the point that they are going to be depending less on eyewitness report and start focusing more on science. There's no question that we need to move in that direction, but to say that we're moving away from this over-reliance upon eyewitness report is an indication that we have given up on this community policing approach that we have been pushing, and we recognize, based upon citizens' report, is what we need to go for in terms of the reduction in crime in Jamaica. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insights, Mr. Balford Lewis. I'd now like to invite Professor Anthony Ariat to give his thoughts on the presentation. Prof.
Thank you, Chair. I see people are giving signals. Usually we have a 2-hour limit for these events. And we don't want to treat you all here as the Australian batsmen have treated the West Indian bowlers, which is to hammer them for 600 and odd runs. And then for the next test coming up tomorrow, I believe it is, I hear that all the West Indian bowlers are sick and can't turn up for duty. You know, we wanted to return to future events. So I'll be mindful of the time, that we have over 600 runs on the board already, and it's not really necessary to make any more runs. So I want to make a brief comment on 2 issues. Brief. And if you want to probe them further, then I can elaborate. And the first is this mystery of our seeming mystery of this gap between insecurity and risk. Risk low, insecurity high. On the face of it, seems quite mysterious. Well, I'm old enough now, so I tend to probe things for their history. And there are different things that work here, but there's a body of work on insecurity. It's usually called the fear of crime literature, right? And it's a really voluminous literature. And studies of insecurity, independently of the crime situations, have been done on Jamaica and Trinidad. So we have some limited evidence to go on, and we can not just limit ourselves to speculating about the matter. And there are two sets of predictors of insecurity. And one has to do with physical vulnerability and the other social vulnerability. So when I look at, for example, some of the data on the elevated levels of insecurity of women, immediately what registers in my mind, perhaps some physical vulnerabilities are at work here, right? And then when you look at young males in inner city communities, you can disaggregate the data along those lines. You look at young males in inner cities communities where the risk of falling victim to a homicide is very high. And you see that their levels of insecurity are low. Especially if you look at the data on the so-called garrison communities. The levels of insecurity are low, but the risk is high. These are hotspot communities. So what's going on there? Tight, cohesive communities. Low sense of vulnerability. It's a garrison. It can't be invaded by other gangs. It's protected turf, right? And they are the protectors, and they know where the danger lies, and they know where their defenses are strong and where their familiar territory. You're part of a community. So even though the risk is high, your sense of security is high. A low sense of insecurity. And this is not just Jamaica, this is not just Trinidad, it's in some of the inner city communities in America too, where similar studies have been done and similar findings reported. So it's not as mysterious as it seems, right? Common sense would suggest a better alignment between insecurity and risk, right? But not everything is common sense. That's why we have the social sciences, right? So that's the first point, right? The second thing that I want to comment on is this relationship. LAPOP studies are very strong on it. I've been tracking it over the decades. This relationship between democracy and security, right? And it's important to track it because the project has generated some really interesting findings, right? Perhaps a high-level finding is that democracies are at risk if they don't perform. Another finding I would want to suggest based on my reading of the data is that they are most at risk when they don't reform in relation to what's considered their fundamental duty, which is to provide security for their citizens, right? So you look at the data on insecurity and support for military coup d'etats, and that is pretty clear. The more insecure, more people tend to opt for regime change, not just change of government from PNP to GLP, but change of type of government, right? Regime change. So that's a serious issue, and I pay very close attention to the issue whenever a report comes out, right? Okay, so where I want to push LAP up, now I want to push the discussion, is to take off from this and to examine more closely how our population, the Jamaican population, is making forced trade-offs between security or order, however you wish to put it, as a political value, right, versus freedoms and rights. Right? That's the debate that's been going on in Jamaica now, and the issue is how is public opinion influencing the behavior of government, the behavior of the police force, because indeed it does influence positively and negatively, right? And if we look at the support for coups, for example, we may infer from this that people are ranking order above freedom, because implied in support for a military coup to discipline criminality is that you accept some restrictions on your freedom. So we could say it kind of entails a ranking of political values, right? But I want us to make it more explicit and to see, when forced with choices, how do people rank their political values? So that's a challenge to lap up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Harriet. We'll now move to Ms. Diane McIntosh, Executive Director of Citizen Security Secretariat, who is joining us via Zoom.
Okay. Good morning. Is everybody seeing me, hearing me? Am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
Yes? Okay, good morning. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. So very quickly, I'm recognizing the time. I want to thank Dr. Luke for his presentation and thank the discussion so far. I have a presentation I'll just run through very quickly, but I note the summary areas of the survey and the key points, especially those raised by both the Professor Harriet, by our discussion so far, the points of dropping off in a feeling of insecurity, and some of the other areas about bridging the gender gaps, women feeling increased less secure in their neighborhood, but of course there's a greater sense of security too. So my presentation today is really to suggest how are we going to remove and minimize or improve the resilience of and improve on the worry on, well, minimize on the worry of crime, improve on these stats. How are we going to change the narrative? How are we working to change the narrative? And also, a very interesting point that Professor Harriet raised is on the issue of democracy and security. How are the agencies, how is public policy administration affecting all of this? We have a whole new approach, citizen security, recognizing that citizen security is more than a response by the security forces. It's an all-of-government approach. So in 2020, Cabinet approved a citizen security plan, a very multi-sectoral and community-focused approach to improving security, citizen security in Jamaica, addressing some root causes, and really undertaking to improve the services, the public policy administration of services that ministries, departments, and agencies, and general stakeholder groups, achieving greater coherence, efficiency, and efficacy. The mapping of the program looks at the root causes, yes, and can I get, right, thanks, Georgiana, who's gonna share the screen, just very quickly so you can get I want to imprint on your minds with some, right, these root causes, and of course, connect the dots of these root causes to the next slide, to a central data-driven approach, which looks at how we're going to impact these areas, creating safer spaces, working with the police through the data, of course, to track, monitor, reduce crime and violence through strengthening and looking at the data systems that we have. Also, changing behavior, developing human and community capacities. We're talking about rebuilding trust, building greater collaboration, creating greater inclusivities, connecting the dots, the delivery of services, public policy, administration, servicing the public good, to ensure that these levels that have been discussed in the survey will be strengthened over time. Next slide talks about the partnership. CSP recognizes this is a citizen security plan, as I said, more so than it's not a response by the security force, it's a response by all of us. And we're talking about 15 MDAs, engaging them under we're working under the Ministry of National Security, particularly with the Crime Prevention Unit. We're working closely with, as someone had asked a question about recidivism, the District Department of Correctional Services, much more openness and greater collaboration with the JCF and along with other MDAs. As you see, all of the MDAs here, the thematic focus that will help to create this strengthening and rising these levels of security and bridging these gender gaps, all the issues that the survey speaks to: health, education, training, and employment. But at the center of it all, of course, next slide, is collecting the data. And this is what we're all goaled up about over the next 5 years. Everybody is focused on the specific types of data collection, management, looking at everybody's data collection systems. How are we governance and coordinating these systems? And this is happening now in looking at the critical areas that are addressing the root causes, improving safer public spaces, increasing the training and certifications for at-risk groups, a very, very tentative, very, very sensitive group, increasing employment, right? And improving participation in parenting, and all of this to help improve inclusivities, improve communities, the citizen police relationship, psychosocial support, which has been showing that there's a big gap in this. And so the reducing the risk levels of these high risk groups. But data is the most important of this all, right? Now, the CSS, I'm the executive director of the Citizen Security Secretariat, that's looking at how we're coordinating or implementing the Citizen Security Plan. Next slide. And this approach speaks to, as I said, very heavy on collecting the data. We have started, we're working with the 15 or so MDAs, and we're heavily in monitoring and tracking and using what we call deliverology model, a model that focuses on results, monitoring, tracking, assessments of everybody's delivery chain through a delivery unit, key targets, indicators, routines, very aggressive, very robust, very rigid levels of of looking at each of these entities and how they're contributing to connecting these services to the people. Go on to the next slide, and we're deep diving, into these vulnerabilities. Oh, here we are, the data-driven approaches. So data is very, very critical to the approach, as I said, and these are all the key nodes that we're working through. Data liaison, creating new inputting data liaison technicians into these key entities that impact on these risk areas: education, health, labor, social security, doing an environment assessment of the data landscape across all these entities that are critical to these key vulnerability areas. Some baseline data collections happening, especially in the ZOZOs right now. So at least we can begin to have an idea with that is scientific as to what exactly is going on. Integrating this information. Commissioner talks about within the force integrating his own service delivery approach. We're taking the data from everybody and integrating as well. And in particular, creating data share. We have created data sharing committees, and this is very, very robust activity with the JCF. They're very pivotal here. So we're overlaying crime and violence data along with what's going on in education, along with what's going on in health, key things, so that we can see how over time, how is the space changing? When you come back in a few years with this LAPOP report, you begin to see different things because this integration is taking places and the building of trust because everybody's sitting at the table and sharing the data. All of this is starting to happen in Kingston Western Division or the police division, in St. James, in Sablamar in particular. All right, and we're starting to work with a STAR project. After I gather Safi will come on and talk about STARs, the PSOJ's approach. Commissioner spoke about that. We are also beginning to look at joint monitoring and evaluation indicators. How can we, synergize what we're evaluating so that we can and look at indicators so that we can measure, in a more comprehensive way, all of us in the space, and we're all following the same type of measurements. In terms of the individual areas, I just want to raise very quickly education, deep diving into some of the vulnerabilities. Next slide. In the schools, there are some 25 to 34 schools across the ZOZO space, and we're looking at these schools first with Ministry of Education as a process owner here, but we're working with them, tracking with them, deep diving into the vulnerabilities around the particular sectors in education. What's causing the dropout rate to be so high? What's causing youngsters who are out of school not qualifying for any training or employment capabilities, low levels of academic performance, this involvement in gang, what's happening in the schools, and education is really taking on this in a more detailed way in terms of looking at the data, collecting the data. I mentioned the data liaison and data interns, partnerships with universities, partnerships with university students who can come in and help the principals to track, to collect their data so that it's live. So a principal can look every morning and see what is his or her attendance level, what is the general literacy level in the school. Next slide, please. All right. And then you set up targets. So we've set up the targets. We've been working from targets from 2021, 22. Yeah. Customized behavior change in parenting, parents who are exposed and trained and received specified training to be able to work alongside the community, in these communities, work with in the schools, work with the children. We have indicators for safe spaces. JCF's working closely in the communities to create spaces where everybody feels safe. They can go to, they can operate from, they can even do events from, utilization of the spaces. And we're talking about psychological safe spaces as well. Also, MEGJEC is also involved. These are some of the ministries, police stations, the facilities to be renovated, helping to build like police-citizen relationships, creating very customer-friendly spaces where interviews can take place without feeling threatened in any way, or these are some of the things that are being tracked, monitored. At-risk youth. What is the population of at-risk youth really like? How are we're working with building now cohorts with HEART, with Department of Correctional Services, Labor and Social Security, looking at these key ministries to see who has what type of at-risk. Is he unattached? Is he unengaged? Is he or she at risk in the school? Is he or she pre-at risk to becoming at risk, basically? And so this is a target. And there is also the government-run shelters for domestic violence. What types of victims are we focused on? What is happening with the program there so that we don't have the same types of person going back into the court systems on a regular basis and not getting that level of treatment to prevent returning to both being victim and perpetrators of this area. Next slide. So our priority focus, it's very priority focused, data collection, the school strategy, a whole new area, not new, but an area that needs attention because if not managed, you are youngsters who have case management needs, who have psychosocial needs. This is an area that is now receiving some assessment and looking at what the type of expenditure that is needed in the budget to be able to increase psychosocial support, the type of psychosocial support, reducing the level of the flood on the child guidance clinics by understanding collecting the data from there to understand where are most of our youngsters coming from with real issues, and the numbers that are in the school system, what are the numbers, where are they being referred to? And once you start, building a psychosocial environment, a positive psychosocial environment, then you're going to begin to reduce the propensity to crime and violence, so that it does not become a police problem when this young says, 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, etc. Strategic partnerships. So moving along, I just wanted to also stress that in the school system, moving along, the schools are exposed, those 25 to 34 schools, to, as I said, literacy improvement plans, new types of leadership, behavior change, and a focus on, tracking these things. We're tracking with them every semester, every end of term. What is your literacy rate? What is your psychosocial case levels of support that's needed? Who is going where, as I said, in terms of case management. And so this is what I just want to go then to about 3 slides up, Georgiana. One, just keep, because I'm winding down now because I recognize there's a right. There's also the look at case management demand and supply, the needs of number of persons in need of case management services, the capacity to provide is not there. So of course, this becomes a budgetary and an issue that's presented to our budget officers, Ministry of Finance, because the data is showing this is what the needs are. This is really what we don't have. And we need to bridge this gap, because a youngster who is not getting these services over time moves from, you really begin to pull out your psychotic, your youngsters who really need the support, and then you move them from that propensity to fall into the pool. And finally, in our way forward, we are partnership. Focus is on the integrated wraparound service. There's a wraparound service delivery. We're tracking everybody, that those key areas: education, employment, case management, and psychosocial. These are key areas right now that if we drill down into for the next 2-3 years, you should be able to see some changes, and linking them across the community space, working with the police in partnerships with the final slide, all our partners in terms of the at-risk, HEART, NSTA, Labor Social Security, JCF, JDF, private sector, university partnerships, NGO partnerships with STAR, Positive Pathways, to support this all-embracing multi-sectoral citizen security plan. And of course, as Professor Harriet speaks about, it's about really taking to task institutionalizing what our ministries, departments, and agencies ought to be doing, tracking them, holding them accountable, and it's looking at the strengthening of our public policy administration, which goes back to really making connectivity to our services and building greater trust for the citizens, and truly pulling them in to be much more inclusive in what's going on around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh, for that information. We'll now move on to our final panelist, Ms. Safri Brown.
Morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi. All right, morning everyone. Sorry I'm not there with you today. I've actually come down with the flu, and I know since COVID, we try to be respectful of people's health and wellness. So I thought it was best to join you remotely today. I just want to thank Luke and the team for sharing the study with us, and for really inviting me to join in the discussion. I know that we're at the 11th hour, so I will be brief. So today I'm representing STAR, which is a PSOJ JCF social and economic transformation project, really being delivered in under-resourced, highly vulnerable communities. And these communities experience high levels of both crime and violence. So my perspective is going to be based on the levels of vulnerabilities and the current realities faced by the communities of this type and their connection to the findings of the study. And so as it relates to low levels of crime victimization, well, it's interesting that from the study, we see that half of those surveyed see crime as a major issue. But then Jamaica reports the lowest levels of crime victimization in the region. So there seems to be a sort of imbalance there. For one, I would need a better understanding of both the definition of crime victimization used and how it's being understood by those being surveyed. And I do note that Luke made reference to this earlier as it relates to the understanding, or rather the classification of crime. And then there seems to be a variation between perception versus reality. Or maybe there is more an increasing acceptance of what is happening, a sort of desensitization, if you will. We maybe can call this resilience to some extent, but really it's more of a sort of growing acceptance of the status quo if it's been going on long enough. Also, is intimate partner violence really seen as a crime? As we know, in Jamaica, it takes place in an estimated average of 60% of households, according to the Women's Safety Survey. And we know that the beating of children or women may not be perceived as a crime unless someone is seriously injured or unless it is an actual report to the police. So if gender-based violence is seen as a crime, and if people's minds when thinking of crime victimization is that it is crime, I wonder whether the findings may be different. And if we look at the study according to GBV, 2 in 5 think that GBV is likely to happen, but we know that 3 in 5 experience it. And then if we look at intimate person violence, which is really most prevalent between 10 to 29-year-olds, and is also the most prevalent form of violence often triggered by fights and arguments, it may be seen as a conflict really between relationships and may not be classified as crime, again, unless it is reported or there is serious injury. It's also the most underreported group. And so also as it relates to insecurity in neighborhoods, being the lowest in Jamaica. This was really interesting. There was a lot of stuff coming out of this study that was very interesting. But what we see in our communities, for example, in Sav and East Downtown Kingston, is that residents know their boundaries and they feel safe within their boundaries, but they won't necessarily move outside of the boundary. Or rather, they see the risk as something that they put themselves in by going to certain areas or parts of the community. And therefore take a certain amount of responsibility, again, when we talk about victimization, that may be one of the issues that we're finding. In East Downtown Kingston, for example, a young man that we spoke to would not leave his house unless he ran to where he was going. He understood his own safe boundaries and where he was really at risk. What we're also seeing is a breakdown in social service access to many of these vulnerable communities. So, for example, in East Downtown Kingston, there are no public medical facilities in the community. And with limited ability for movement, this affects access to health services. A similar situation exists with access to training facilities. There's a disconnect between provision and access, especially where movement is restricted. And we can apply this principle across the board, including access to things like dispute resolution, restorative justice services, and all these other things. And so when we refer to insecurity within communities, and I refer to non-garrison communities, even where there are services provided, access is limited and invariably insecurity increases and the issues are further compounded. I just want to touch on the issue of distrust of police, because as you know, STAR is a project being delivered by the JCF and the private sector, along with multi-sectoral partners, MDs and so on. So the findings in the study are in keeping with what we see on the ground, and it shows that trust is relational. There is a closer relationship between local police and the communities. We are aware that if you build trust, you get intelligence, you can be more targeted with your strategy and have better tracking and levels of prosecution. In 2020, we worked with the Jamaica Constabulary Force on the PSOJ COVID Fund. And so over a 3 to 4 month period, food packages were distributed by the police to vulnerable residents in 25 high-risk communities. One constable indicated when we were handing out food packages in Torres Meadows in Spanish Town that having been assigned to that division for 6 months, that this was the first time that he was actually walking the community and meeting the residents. His only involvement in the community prior to this had been on targeted operations to go in, extract, and come out. In another part of St. Catherine, a superintendent of police spoke about, again, from distributing these food packages on a regular basis, increased intel from residents, again, as a result of building relationships. And within East Downtown Kingston, what we're seeing is that where the citizen security safety branch officers have built relationships with community members, that this has led to a level of engagement that provides real opportunities for community engagement. And so this community building work by the police, if properly supported by the local community, by NGOs, by CBOs, and other agencies of the state, can really strengthen the approach to safety, security, and invariably to the reduction of crime and exposure to crime. And so this, in essence, is a STAR model, right? To build relationships, to work with the community, police, MDs, and other local and national stakeholders, to lead on the solutions and strategies for improving safety, and to build community support systems, to target the approach, and slowly over time to work on mindset, trauma, attitudes, norms, and so on. In terms of discrimination by employers, again, STAR has as a core pillar of its model, economic transformation with a focus on employment. What we do know is that we have to work on mindset change across the board in terms of how we value people and of perceived risk versus actual risk, or rather the threat versus risk. But overall, as it relates to perception versus reality, both are important indicators of the level of vulnerability faced by communities. Both must be measured because together they give us a clearer picture of where things are and how people feel, really within the context of their own safety, within their well-being, and within their sort of overall quality of life. So that's really what our findings are from the study. So I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown of Project STAR Jamaica, for detailing the importance of building trust and policing in Jamaica. And thank you to our presenter and all the panelists for sharing their insightful thoughts on the findings. In the interest of time, I now open the floor to members of the audience to direct your questions to members of the panel. Yes, first question.
Hi, good. Is it still morning? Yes, hi, good morning. I am Derniel O'Connor, the Monitoring Evaluation Learning Specialist from Positive Pathways. And my questions, I have two, are to Dr. Plutowski. Is that correct? Plutowski, yes. So my first question has to do with, you looked specifically at self-reporting in terms of measuring victimization. You looked at self-report. And that's a very clinical understanding or look on victimization, when a more social look on victimization might have been vicarious victimization in terms of how many of us know someone who has been a victim of a crime. And would that have colored the idea of closed the gap a little bit in terms of victimization and the concern, and would that have also opened you a little bit more to look at homicides? Because, of course, you said persons who have been victims of homicide, you cannot interview them, but what about the persons who have been vicarious victims of homicide and vicarious victims of other crimes? And has that colored our concern? Because we are hearing that people that we know are victims and has somehow informed some of our insecurity and our concern. And my last question, which is a little bit technical, is around trust, and specifically around how we've chosen to operationalize trust within the study, how we've chosen to operationally define it. Because when I think of trust in police, it could be trust in police to keep me safe, trust in the police to do their job, trust in the police to not be corrupt, and there are many levels of what trust could have been defined or assumed by the respondent. So I'm asking in terms of how did LAPOP define or operationalize trust, or how is it trying to define or operationalize trust as a part of the study?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. I think that's really useful ideas to think about as we're designing our next questionnaire going into 2023. I think we could definitely think about tweaking these questions or probing further into what people think of trust in the police, and also, as you mentioned, about knowing other people who are victims of crimes. We're kind of limited by space on our questionnaire, and I think there's trade-offs to each of those. The trust question, we actually have a whole series of questions asking, do you trust this institution, that institution, et cetera? And we make it deliberately kind of vague, or, just ask the question very directly, because, you could go down a whole rabbit hole of figuring out what exactly people mean by trust. But I definitely agree that there's, especially when it comes to police, there's different dimensions. Do you trust police to solve crime, or do you trust police to, be responsible with the power they have, things like that. Yeah, self-reporting of crime, that's something we've just asked about for years. So I think we just want to know, based off your own experience, because, you could hear about things, but they might not be super accurate. So we wanted to just ask about self-reporting of crime. But I think, given how nuanced this issue is in Jamaica, I think we could think about adding different types of questions. Thanks.
Could I say something?
Yeah, please.
It's on, we can hear it.
Okay, yes. The trust that we're talking about there, though, is what we call institutional trust. It is the police as an institution. So we have a number of questions relating to how do you trust elections, just generally, do you trust elections? Do you trust the office of the Prime Minister, not the Prime Minister himself personally? Do you trust the justice system? So it is really institutional trust and not necessarily trusting the activities of the police in per se. Okay?
All right, thank you. We do have another question from a member from Capri. Oh, he's coming.
Hi, my name is Renique, and I'm an intern at Capri, and my question will be directed to Dr. Luke. I wanted to ask about the research methodology specifically, because I know you outlined the fact that interviews took place via cell phone or calls, and I wanted to know if the methodology might have impacted the understanding of victimization in any way, or in your opinion, do you think the face-to-face interviews provided for a better understanding of the issues that were being examined compared to the surveys that took place last year?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So it was sort of a big challenge transitioning everything to telephone compared to our usual face-to-face surveys. We did observe that we received more responses from people in kind of higher socioeconomic brackets, just based off the people who own cell phones versus, going to people's homes. But we tried to correct that through, methodologically through survey weighting and adjusting the estimates so that it's more representative. So I think we have some degree of confidence that the results are comparative over time. But of course, there's the problem of COVID being an issue. So it's sort of difficult to disentangle that effect. And then we also, so we are going back to face-to-face because we've observed these coverage issues, and we feel that people, are a little more trusting of interviewers when they can see them in their home. And I think there could be a possibility of, some type of effect of that mode, but I didn't see any clear evidence of that necessarily.
All right, we have one more question.
So good morning, guys. I'm Stafford, a student at the Department of Government. My question is directed to Mr. Lewis. I see what you stated, that you said indirectly the Prime Minister is giving up on the eyewitness report and moving more towards that of cyber science.
Yeah.
Do you believe
sorry,
this
I
is...
didn't say he has. I'm saying that based upon that response.
Based on the response.
I'm getting that impression that he's now saying that we are shifting.
Shifting towards
we are
it.
shifting from the eyewitness report to more circumstantial. Then I imagine that he suggested that we're not going very far in terms of success with the eyewitness approach.
Yeah. Typically that. But my question is, do you believe that this is like a problem because of the lack of institutional trust, or
Yeah,
more
that's the point
of trust
I was
in
going to say.
general?
Yeah,
And
I'm
what would you
talking-
recommend?
Yeah, that's the point I was making, that maybe one of the reasons why we're not getting enough citizen participation, why the relationship between the police and the citizens are not very good, is because of the trust factor, that they are not trusting the police in their community generally. But what we saw from that last survey is that the trust level within the community itself is higher than the national trust. So when we ask them generally if they trust the police, they will say no. Most of them will say no. That's why we end up with that 33% trust level. But when we talk about working with the police in your community, we see much more persons are willing to work with the police. So it is just how do you build on that trust within the community that people can maybe be more willing to discuss crime with their police officers. Because as Professor Harriet said in one study, most time when people talk about community policing, the police see it in terms of intelligence. Community policing for them mean that if I get close to the community, I can find out more things about crime, or I can find out things about issues that we want information on, and not necessarily to build up the rapport to make sure that whenever the crime situation comes around, then they can get the information. They are more focused on intelligence than on a relationship.
All right, thank you.
All right, do we have any more questions? All right, one from the USAID team.
Wasn't so much about a question, but an observation. You mentioned what happened in 2012, where you saw an increase in the confidence. I think when you went to the 41%.
Yeah.
And then it also coincided with one of the lowest years of murders. We had 1,000, and I think it was 49. The previous year was a Tivoli incursion, which I think could have influenced people's perception and trust of the police's ability to do their work. So that is something I think. And also something that Major General mentioned about the 53 persons being locked up and the resultant or apparent, if people wanted to put a direct relationship between the fall in crime and those 53 persons being detained. And I think he was saying that there probably wasn't a correlation, but I think it's important to note who those 53 people were. In St. Catherine, when there was the Klansman trial and most of the persons were locked up, we saw a sharp decrease in crime. And murders. So I think, or murders in general. So I think that there could possibly be an important relationship between who is locked up and dropping crime. But that's my.
Hi, yes, just to add what she was saying, I totally agree. I'm from Spanish Town, and I'm from the area of Tradica Park. So in 2010, we experienced a gruesome crime in our community where 8 persons were murdered. This community didn't really trust the police force as much until that day, because during that time, the police force was they had a station in our community. So the crime rate went down from in Tradica Park and Larston area. And we realized that when the police force interact with us more and doesn't stigmatize our surroundings, we realize that the security is the crime rate goes down. As well as she was saying about the Klansman, the crime rate in St. Catherine went drastically down. So it's just that we have to come together as not just as the security force, but as a community and as a society to limit the crime rates, because it's just not on the police force or the politicians, but it's also with us.
All right, thank you for that, Monifa. All right, so if there are no further questions, on behalf of the Department of Government, I would like to thank Professor Lloyd Waller for organizing this event, Drs. Daly and Walters, Deputy Directors of the Center for Leadership and Governance, Mr. Gaynor and team from USAID, Dr. Plutowski from Lapop Lab, and members of the audience for joining us today. You're all invited to share in refreshments being provided on the outside. With that said, please do take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.